Hi guys, so I've recently completed The Medium, a homage to the Silent Hill games, and I've had this nagging urge to talk about it. I know it's been spoken about by many others, there's a lot to speculate, but there's one aspect that I feel has been slightly overlooked, and that is the use of fixed camera angles. I went into this game pretty much blind, and I got pretty excited when I realised that it had brought fixed camera angles back into a mainstream horror survival game. See, back in the day, fixed camera angles were the preferred style for survival horror games. And I got major flashbacks to being a kid, hiding under the duvet, watching my friends play Silent Hill and Alone in the Dark, because I was too scared to play. This technique was popularized back in the day because of the hardware limitations. They allowed for pre-rendered backgrounds, which were cheaper and looked much better than blocky 3D environments and stretched textures.
Right. Let's go find Dad!
It also paired nicely with the tank controls of the time, so for those of you who remember the PlayStation 1 era, where the controller only had a D-pad allowing you to go forwards, backwards, lefts and right independently, meaning that you're unable to move while rotating like a tank. Tank controls. So that was back then, but where are fixed camera games now? Since the hardware limitations have lifted and the tank controls got replaced by more modern controls using analog sticks, the preferred camera style has evolved to become third or first person. And with good reason. This allows the player to control with more agency because it gives them control over the camera angle itself. And from this, it arguably provides more player immersion by allowing the player to view from the main character's perspective. So is there even a need for fixed camera angles to return? I mean, many would argue no. Fixed camera angles hinder the entire gameplay experience by removing this agency and restricting player controls and ability. So why did The Medium, a modern and mainstream horror game, choose to take this approach and ultimately take a step back in so many players' eyes? See, The Medium offered a unique game mechanic called dual reality. This brought back limitations that swayed them, among other reasons, to choose a fixed camera angle. It allowed the devs the opportunity to control the camera's position, leaving the player free to soak in its beautiful environments without the motion sickness that comes from having two versions of that same environment swaying back and forth. But still, for me, something was slightly amiss. I wanted to figure out why I felt like something was amiss and what that was. So initially I went back to figure out what makes a good survival horror game, or horror anything. Insert Mr. Stephen King. Hello. This is Stephen King's book, Danse Macabre, where in it he explains what he feels makes a good piece of horror work. So I'm going to just read to you an excerpt. The audience screams as the empty wheelchair chases the lady, but the real scare has already happened. It comes as the camera dwells on those long, shadowy staircases, as we try to imagine walking up those stairs towards some as yet unseen horror waiting to happen. Tense atmosphere. Every horror game is abundant with creepy enemies to either defeat or hide from. But the thrill of this genre isn't actually about the monster under the bed. It's about the journey between realizing that a monster could be under the bed and plucking up the courage to retreat from the safety of your duvet to go and check. This is the struggle for the horror franchise and the frustration that I personally feel when I realise that a piece of horror has veered too far into action. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be able to defend yourself once that monster does finally emerge from under the bed, but I want to feel like I've been able to overcome something to get to that point. To simply shoot a horde of zombies that are just lined up in a hallway with no build-up just does not cut it for me. Sorry, Resident Evil 5 and 6. Although 6 is fun to play with a friend, I will give it that. To create tension, you need pacing, a way to slow the player down so they'll notice every pin drop and wind howl, to heighten their senses and let them revel within their journey toward the monster. Some horror games do this by stifling a player's movement speed, and personally I really don't feel like this works. I feel like it's too intrusive and it ends up actually just causing frustration for a player. Why did we split up? This is such a bad idea. I'm walking so slow. Doesn't make sense, and it takes them out of the experience, which is the opposite of what you're trying to do here. Fixed camera angles, however, skew the player's vision, which innately makes them want to move slower in anxious anticipation of what awaits them in the next camera view. And by prohibiting their direct view of what is in front of them, this actually heightens other senses. It leads the player to become more perceptive and rely on audio cues or visual clues to warn them of an impending danger. Actually, a recent example of this is within Little Nightmares 2, which I am currently still in the middle of playing. Love that game. This platformer game uses a side-on view for its 2.5D effect, fixing the camera to move alongside the player. So it's not technically a fixed camera game, however they do have a fixed camera angle, so the developers have more control over that. The game cleverly teases players with audio and shadows before revealing the dreaded monster, or they even manage to keep the monster out of focus as the players play, which leaves all the tiny details to the player's imagination, which innately is just going to make anything much more terrifying. Giving the player full control of a camera from a third or first person perspective just would never have the same effect. That's normal! Narrative. Not all of us, but most of us, need a reason to become frightened. Something that touches us more than just big monsters are scary or character might die. I'm gonna die again! What do I do here? Where do I go? What is my purpose in life? So many questions! We need a goal to reach and a reason to feel invested in the player's survival. And if you can sprinkle a little bit of relatability into the mix, then the fears become much more intense, as a relationship that you develop with the character you're controlling strengthens. And fixed camera angles allow unique ways to tell narrative through cinematics and subtle suggestions. Oh my gosh, that's really hard to say. Subtle suggestions. You try and say it. See, this way of representing environments mimics that of a film. Developers can use low angles to show a sense of scale, high angles to create a sense of repression, artistic, semi-fixed transitions, like in Silent Hill, to disorient a player. These are all ways of adding to an atmosphere that is pivotal in evoking the intense emotions of fear and anxiety that are needed within a horror game. These camera angles can subvert player expectations by surprising them, by showing the player through the viewpoint of a monster, just out of sight through a window pane or a locked door, subtly reminding the player that they are never truly alone and to always keep their guard up. This mixture of different camera angles actually allows the player to survey the character that they're controlling, which is really rare nowadays, what with third-person, over-the-shoulder camera angles, and especially with first-person games, where it's an exciting moment when you find a mirror. I'm Batman. I'm Batman. The player could visibly see their character's emotional state after they're recovering from a recent enemy encounter, or if they're creeping through a dark hallway towards the soft sound of knocking behind a door from the other end of the corridor. See, as humans, we feed off emotion, and most of us can't help but feel empathy if we see others in pain or in fear. And why is this not used more in games outside of cutscenes? When I was playing The Last of Us 2, I would stop and go into photo mode, and geez, the character animations in that are amazing, and their emotional states are just represented so well in every single scenario that I decided to pause in. It was done so good, but I only noticed that when I took the time to pause the game and actually have a look at what Ellie was feeling. And yes, I know if you have control over the camera, you can technically just turn the camera so you can look front-facing at your character. But realistically, who is going to do that while playing the game? Not me. I want to see what's in front of me. If I have the option, I will do that. Strategy and puzzle solving. So I've spoken a lot about how we can use fixed camera angles to bring a cinematic quality, just like we see in horror films, but this is a game after all, so players expect a level of engagement and difficulty to overcome. To survive a tense environment, the player is challenged with problems that they have to solve. This is either in the form of environmental challenges, outsmarting danger, or so they can face their fear head-on and overcome it. When you have a visual constraint, almost everything becomes a puzzle, even killing enemies, as you have to constantly stay on guard as to where the enemies might be and where the best places would be to lure enemies towards to kill them, or where the best places would be to hide from enemies if you encounter them. That's why, especially back in the day with survival horror games, if you were given the option of combat to defend yourself, then ammunition was extremely scarce. So conserving that ammunition for boss battles was vital, and the best players would instead find windows of opportunity to avoid combat completely, in order to conserve their ammunition and more powerful weapons for tougher enemies that will no doubt be ruthless and take a lot of damage. Scares! Jump scares are a staple of the horror genre, and if timed correctly and used not too often, they could actually be extremely effective. Fixed camera angles allow the developers control over what the players can view, allowing them to switch the camera angle at just the right time so as to focus on the climatic event that the quiet, dark hallway has been leading up to. As an arm crashes through the door, fingertips stretching out just in front of the player's shocked face. It's too easy to miss a dramatic event when you're playing in first person and even in third person, and it's just not the same when the control is taken away completely and everything's put into a cutscene. Having the devs line up the camera makes it much easier to scare the player once they finally do come face to face with the monster. They're forced to witness the jump scare in all its glory, but also have the burden of the control over reacting to it and the events that unfold immediately afterwards. What's behind the door or lurking at the top of the stairs is never as frightening as the door or the staircase itself. And because of this comes the paradox. The artistic work of horror is almost always a disappointment. The monster. When the player finally does come face to face with the monster that's been hunting them throughout the game, 9 times out of 10, it'll be somewhat of a relief, as a lot of the fear lies within the unknown. Take Amnesia, for example. That game was terrifying, and it brought back survival horror when it had started to veer into a more action genre. A lot of the fear stemmed from the fact that you had to run away from the monster, so the fear of the unknown was there throughout most of the game. However, once players started to become a bit braver and take a good look at the model itself, then they became accustomed to it and even turned it into pretty hilarious memes. It's always hard to find that balance between keeping an element of unknown while also satisfying the need to reward the player's bravery by revealing the horrors. And since it's a video game, giving them a chance to physically overcome it. Which I will also say the medium just did not give us that chance to do. It's very annoying. Every main boss battle just occurred within a cutscene and I was so ready, and it just, no, it's over. Anyway, fixed camera angles makes fighting enemies harder as the player's camera control is taken away from them, which leads the enemy to become even more intimidating. This can also be a source of frustration for the player, especially if the enemy spawns in or moves towards a place where the camera angle swaps or they cannot see properly. However, it really can be used as a tool for the player to have a chance to confront the monster without getting a really close look at every detail. I'll refer you back to my earlier comment on Little Nightmares 2. So some examples, perhaps the player can hear it just beyond the camera's view, and when they brave walking towards the camera, the monster then walks out in front of the camera themselves, intimidating the player and still not allowing them a proper view of the monster itself. This also leads to interesting enemy concepts, such as monsters which can scale the walls to keep out of view of those fixed camera angles, such as lickers in Resident Evil, and each enemy type will have their telltale to help players know that they're there without the players needing to control the camera, such as zombies with their constantly outstretched arms so that their fingers will poke out behind corners.
Oh, there's a zombie.
Or drips of liquid from the ceilings of something waiting to pounce, which is what the lickers do, right? Pretty sure? So, I've just talked your ear off about the positive uses of fixed camera angles and how they can be used to enhance a game, especially a survival horror game. So, where did the medium fall short with this? Their chosen playstyle for overcoming the monster sections of their game was stealth. However, their level design really didn't accommodate for this, and fixed camera angles only hindered it more. God, it was so frustrating. There were limited places to hide, most of the time only being one place, and sometimes you even had to backtrack, and that really isn't intuitive when the fixed camera angle is faced towards and past the player. During these stealth moments, it was extremely hard to get a good view on where the hiding spots were in the dark and cluttered environments. A lot of the times I would move towards what I thought was a hiding spot, only to get stuck on collision that I couldn't really make out in front of me, and that really took me out of the gameplay experience.
Can I not get behind like any other f***ing cover?
Tell you what, I just absolutely hated the stealth in that game. I feel like there was no options for the player. Every single time I play a stealth game, I always have multiple different paths to choose. With this game, there was none. I don't even think you were supposed to be choosing. It was just very linear. But if you are a player who plays multiple types of stealth games, so I just kicked the desk, then you probably would have failed at these stealth moments because you're used to being able to move around and make your decisions. But you couldn't even see the environment, and most of the time when you thought you had multiple choices, you didn't. Lol, jokes, you're caught, you're dead. Anyway. Now the camera angles did do a really good job of showing the scale of the beautiful environments. And yes, these environments were beautiful. It is a beautiful game visually. Very nice to look at. But it really lacked the flair and the creativity of the old survival horror games that would use fixed camera angles. It did not shock the player with unusual camera placements. And it hardly ever switched viewpoints to hinder the player's view in such a way that they were edging forwards with the promise of something to anticipate beyond the camera's bounds. And the main boss battles, where the player got to confront the most intimidating enemies in the game, were all handled in cutscenes. I mean, that's more of just an overall disappointment than a reflection on the camera decision, but still, the game design just didn't quite match up. With that being said though, I would like to see them give it another go. I mean, the dual reality was a unique take on the genre, and I did really enjoy seeing two different versions of the same location being displayed simultaneously. I even did notice a couple of subtle yet eerie moments where I would look through the mirror into the spirit world and see a spooky ghost-like thing behind me there. And I would have loved to see more moments like that kind of took me off guard a little bit. And like I've said, the game's visuals were breathtaking, and I'm sure that fixed camera angles helped with that, allowing my eye to wander while playing without having the camera constantly move to stick by my character. The establishing shot of some rooms were enough to make me stop moving completely, just to compare the drastic differences between the normal world and the spirit one as a giant hand reached out towards an otherwise normal window. Any game attempting to bring a unique mechanic to the genre is always refreshing to see, and therefore I'm making this video just to share my opinion in the hopes that more developers will take risks. I'm not a fan of the technique being patented though, as I would like to see if other studios could adapt it or build upon it, but Oh well. I also didn't make this video to say that fixed camera games are any better than third or first camera games. I played many of those that left me extremely immersed and terrified. However, I do believe that there are certain moments and atmospheric techniques that are only achievable by using this pretty much dead video game style. And that's a shame, but I'd like to know your thoughts. Do you agree or disagree with my points on fixed camera angle games? Do let me know in the comments below. I'd love to start a conversation about this. Also, did you play the medium and did you have the same opinions on it as me in regards to the camera angles that they chose, or not? All opinions valid. Let's start a conversation. Have a lovely day or evening, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye! I just want to say I really enjoyed making this type of video, and I'd love to do more design commentary. So if you found this useful or helpful or interesting in any way, please do leave it a like and let me know if you want to see more videos like this. Cool, okay, bye.